glad that you could join us on a Saturday morning. Today with me, as we had promised over the past 1 week, I have a very prominent person who not only is someone I really admire, but even Dr. Kalam used to admire him a lot. Meet Professor Sethu Vijayakumar. Thank you for coming here.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Professor Sethu is from the University of Edinburgh. It is one of the most famous universities in the world, the University of Charles Darwin. Dr. Kalam visited this university in May 2014, visited Professor Sethu's laboratory. Now let me tell you what he does. Have you seen robots? You know, those fancy robots like transformers, or those small ones, you know, which mimic butterflies and many other creatures. Professor Sethu is the leading expert of the world on robotics. His journey begins in Kerala, and from Kerala to Japan to study, and from Japan, and he studied mathematics to begin with, and from Japan to Edinburgh. Today, he is the director of the Centre for Robotics at the University of Edinburgh, which is one of the leading centers of robotics in the world. And he's also a professor in the Department of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. So it's fantastic to have you here, sir. And we all, the audience present here, and many others present on this Kalam Centre page, look forward to getting your views. But before I begin, I want to track your journey from Kerala to Edinburgh.
So I must admit that I'm a Keralite, I'm a Malayali, but actually I was born there, but I never spent significant amounts of time in Kerala. So my dad used to work for the government. He was an engineer of the government, Engineers India, and I started my journey. My sort of junior school was done in Tamil Nadu, in Neyveli, and then I moved to Calcutta for my middle school. I spent about 10 years of my schooling in Delhi, just around the corner, Divya's Archipur. So I'm very much a Dubsite and a Delhiite as much as a Keralite, I would say.
So what did you study in India and what did you study abroad?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree in engineering, again in RSC Trichy in the south, and then I did a master's and a PhD program at the University of Tokyo, the Tokyo Institute of Technology, and that was mostly in the area of applied maths, computer science, and very much looking at machine learning. So looking at how we can take data, process it in an intelligent fashion, and create added value with that. And indeed, as you all know now, machine learning and data science has boomed in the past sort of 5 to 10 years. So you can potentially use the domain of machine learning and data science in various guises. You can use it for robotics, you can use it for social media, you can use it for ordering your next pizza. So that was where I got to in terms of my postgraduate study. And I did a year of postdoctoral fellowship at the Riken Brain Science Institute with a very famous professor called Professor Shunichi Amari. He's credited for inventing the neural networks as we know it today. Neural networks, yes. The study of computational neural networks in some sense. After Japan, I moved to LA. So I took my first faculty position at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles.
And that's the US?
In the US, yes. So that was my first postdoctoral fellowship position and first adjunct faculty position at the USC, University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And it's now been sort of 12, 13 years since I moved to Edinburgh.
Right. So you started a journey from engineering into mathematics into robotics.
That's right.
So where was the turning point from mathematics to robotics?
Well, there was always, computer science and mathematics they were all fairly theoretical concepts and things. So you would write an algorithm, you would code up some stuff. But I always had a fascination for things that were mechanical, for things that moved and changed the state of the world. As a kid, I always used to open up gadgets, often not managing to put it back to the original state. My parents would be annoyed at that. But and I think I always felt that I wanted to get into a field where I could take some of this expertise in this kind of applied computational studies into something that changed the state of the world. So robotics was one of the primary areas which really did that. This is where you could really see firsthand the results of something that you've been working on, and that's why I was interested in robotics.
Great. And when did you build your first robot?
So I must say that's the I wouldn't maybe call it a robot, but I started playing with mechanos, things that they are powered, but they're powered in using sort of systems that are linkages rather than lots and tons of motors. So I built my first robot when I was really a kid. I forget, so maybe 12, 13 years old, something like that. But really serious robotics started quite late for me, actually. So I would say when I started doing my PhD rather than my master's, but maybe doing my master's as well. But so later than you would expect.
So the Centre for Robotics in Edinburgh is something which you have been a director for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And in 2014, with Dr. Kalam, I also had the privilege to visit your centre and see so many things, including a football team which you have.
That's great.
Would you like to throw some light about the football team? I'll show this photograph as well to people once you've told this.
Sure. So let me start by giving you a slightly bigger context of what we're doing at the centre. So just like you have a wonderful centre for Abdul Kalam Centre here with a mission about various aspects of education and getting some governance through. We have a similar mission with Edinburgh Centre for Robotics in trying to create world-class excellence in robotics in Scotland, in the UK, in Europe, and really become the leading centre for innovation in the area of robotics. So it's been quite an interesting journey. So when I moved to Edinburgh, Edinburgh was always very well known for artificial intelligence, for machine learning, for things like data science. But robotics was very much at its infancy. There used to be big players in Germany, for example, who were the leaders in that area. Japan traditionally did very well in hardware, and sort of strongholds in the US like Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, MIT's Leg Labs. So they were big competitors, big sort of centers with significant both number of people, the critical mass to make an impact in robotics. So what I felt was that it was important. UK was, I think I would say it's very similar to India in some sense. So we had very good distributed resources, pockets of excellence all around the UK, but there wasn't that critical mass to really go about that threshold in terms of pushing excellence in robotics. Robotics is actually a notoriously hard area to gain that excellence, because it's, first of all, it's multidisciplinary. You need significant initial resources to go above the curve in some sense, because otherwise you'll be always catching up and you'll be kind of trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's what we tried and do. We got the involvement of the government of UK. We tried to impress upon them that robotics is one of the key technologies of the future that is going to transform both the economy that we work in, as well as innovate and disrupt lots of future things that we've not even thought about. So we got the backing of the government in terms of creating large funding, concentrated funding in supporting robotics and artificial intelligence. And we also managed to then create the center, which has got three strands effectively. It's got assets, which is a large world-class equipment, part of which you saw. We are training PhD students in this area so that we have a pipeline to push out talent that's required, and clusters, because we need to do legislation or deal with legislation with government, with local council, to push through some of the governance to make it effective. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. So going back to your visit and Professor and Dr. Abdul Kalam's visit in 2014, in fact, you actually saw the beginnings of those centre. So
that was very impressive.
So if you come back now, you will be even more impressed, I would say. So I was really honoured to know that he was visiting our our university, and he was getting an honorary doctorate. And our Vice Chancellor, Professor Tim O'Shea, he suggested to me that we should definitely show him the advances in robotics, because that is one of our sort of jewel in the crown, so to say. So, so I mean, you guys came over to my lab. So there was a couple of projects that he had a look at. He had a look at the prosthetic arm, which is something that we've taken out of our lab, essentially looking at enabling prosthetics for disabled, for the people who are infirm. At that time, we were focusing on upper limb prosthetics. Now we're doing lower limb prosthetics as well.
That was a hand. I remember.
That was the hand, exactly.
I have a photo of that hand. I'll just show the people here. Right. This is the photo of Dr. Kalam, and the person who is barely visible there is Professor Sethu. And Dr. Kalam is wearing that prosthetic arm and holding a ball with it, a golf ball or something.
It's effectively an example of a robot and human being interfaced to each other. So I was driving that prosthetic arm with an EMG sensor, which is sensing the muscle activity on my hand. And Professor Kalam was wearing that hand, and we were trying to pick up a box and then a ball and objects of different shapes. And so he had some very, very sharp, interesting questions there. If you remember, I mean, he asked me about the controls, of course, but about, you know, how do you reduce the number of motors so that you can eventually bring down the cost of these things. So how do you get redundancy, get synergies? Exactly, degrees of freedom. How do you get synergies into the system so that you can, you know, reduce the degrees of freedom? And actually, those were very, very, very poignant questions, because sometimes when we develop technology, we sometimes tend to lose track of the original aims, and we go down the fancy route of following our passion, which is great. I mean, you have to follow your passion, otherwise you're going to get breakthroughs. But what is really, I think, important and interesting is to ground yourself back into why did you start that journey? And I think for Dr. Kalam, it was always thinking about how can we take technologies from different parts of society and bring it back to, in a very cost-efficient way, in a way that is accessible to the masses for societies like India. So that was a great example of that.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to take a short break. When we return, I want to discuss with you the application of robotics in the future.
And footballing robots.
Footballing
robots.
Yes. One of the applications is that, the RoboCup. Right?
Of course.
And then I want to discuss with you on how India is poised, right? This new automation robotic revolution. And then how do you, out there, become a robotist if you want. Right. Thank you. We'll take a short break for a minute. Hello everyone. Welcome to the second session with Professor Sethu Vijayakumar, who is the leading expert, a global leading expert in robotics, who was very admired by everybody, including Dr. Kalam himself. In fact, Dr. Kalam wrote this book. It's called Reignited. I'm sure many of you have read it. Reignited was written in 2015, and Dr. Kalam's I had the privilege to co-author this book with them. And in 2015, we wrote this book, Reignited, to make students, youngsters, and people who are young at mind, regardless of their age, aware about what scientific careers, what scientific pathways will shape the world of the future. Now, in the chapter, the first chapter, in fact, in this book is robotics. And the robotics chapter, we have featured a very well-known robotic expert, and that well-known robotic expert is none other than Professor Sethu Vijayakumar. In fact, two of his pictures are there on in the book itself, and I will talk about these now. As you saw, the first one I showed you, Dr. Kalam wearing the prosthetic arm, and holding his Dr. Kalam's arm, you can see a hand. That hand is Professor Sethu Vijayakumar. And below that picture, you see these little things. These are robotic players of football, which was something Dr. Kalam was mightily impressed by. And and you showed us the home game. And one of the teams, I think the red team won this game. After a lot of back and forth struggle, the goalkeeper as well as the goalkeeper jumped in.
Yes.
So what I want to understand is 2014 maybe you visited your Center for Robotics at Edinburgh. And you were very kind to show Dr. Kalam and his team, which I was a part of. So this entire multi-floor center which you had, I remember this, not just prosthetic arm, but also there was an active robot, a bigger piece which was over the shoulder itself, and there was this robot team, and then there was some people being tracked on treadmills, and there was a colorful robotic lab. And take us to 2014 and now it has continued. But what all do you do at the Center for Robotics?
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned earlier on, so the center is really a hub for everything, robotics and AI, and looking at cutting-edge disruptive technologies that we want to develop across different domains, different sectors. So you might think the robot football is a bit of fun. What is the real point of robot football? Somebody might ask, you're doing serious robotics, why do you care about robot football? I think the real reason to do something like robot football, before, of course, you want to make it fun, because that's very important for attracting young minds into it, because without that fun aspect, everything becomes dull. So I think that's important. But there's an underlying reason for doing that. It's because the game that you saw there is an example of a real-world situation where robotics is very different from where it was 10, 15 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, robots used to work in very well-defined, structured environments, factories, which are predefined. It's precisely positioned, nothing changes, the environment is put. If you think about a robot football, two teams playing each other, the position of the ball that the robot keeps around is unknown. The state changes, the robot has to use its camera to detect where it is and do locomote while maintaining balance. So these are exactly the same challenges that a robot working in today's everyday society will face. If you think about autonomous driving cars, we cannot structure the rest of the world, including humans, to behave in a particular pattern. There will be unexpected events. You need events that will, you need technology that will be able to cope or adapt to these novel situations. And that is one of the main focuses of our center, robots that learn. And this is where we bring together the expertise in data-driven machine learning, which is about taking data and processing it. This is what Facebook's and Google's do, to take your data and the processes so that you get the right targeted advertisements on your browser the next day. And taking exactly that technology and applying it to robotics so that robots not only do the things that you have programmed it for, but is able to adapt, change behavior based on some sort of criteria to be able to deal with novel, unseen scenarios, novel situations. So that's what you've seen at the center in 2014. Since then, we've had significant new projects, new inputs, new funding from the government. So I'll talk about a recent new funding. This is about overall, it's about 40 to 50 million pounds worth of funding coming from the government and co-funded by the industry. So big companies like BP, Shabdh, Chevron, Texaco.
So that's for that.
That's huge. Yeah, it's
good to see science being funded so liberally.
Absolutely, and I think the reason why it's being funded at this stage is because at this scale, I would say, is because these robotics projects that we are now progressing are what we call challenge-driven. So there is a new emphasis, which is called Industry Strategy Challenge Fund. So essentially, what we're doing is looking at doing cutting-edge science, but not just science just for the heck of it, but looking at global problems that we need to solve. So things like energy, things like pollution, which is very topical here, things like global warming, food security, mining for rare earth materials, nuclear. So how do you decommission and maintain nuclear power plants to ensure power security as the population grows? So all of these things, there are challenges that we're finding. We're looking at robotics and artificial intelligence as something that can help alleviate these problems. So let me give you some concrete 3 examples of projects that we are involved in. So the first one is robotic. It's called the Orca Hub. ORCA. Orca is the name of I think it's a whale, or I think it's a kind of a whale, I think, but it stands for Offshore Robotics for Certification of Assets. So in layman's terms, what it is at the moment, if you go off Bombay High and you look at offshore rigs that go in and dig for oil and gas reserves, the way it works is now a team of people have to ship out, stay there for 6 weeks in adverse conditions, missing out on their family, facing significant risks in terms of potential dangers. So the idea is to remove people from harm's way by automating a lot of these things. So effectively operating an offshore oil rig from the shore. So it's not like saying it's not fully autonomous, but it's still humans monitoring, controlling, looking at milestones from the shore. But you won't have, ultimately, you won't have necessity for people to spend 6 weeks on the shore.
Massive robots.
Different scales. There will be robots that are underwater, looking at pipelines, looking at the asset integrity, whether it's corroded, any leaks. These will be underwater robots. There will be flying drones, which will be placing sensors, disposable sensors, on large structures which are above ground, and then what we call the top side. This is robots that can climb, the stairs, go around structures on the oil rig to both monitor things and intervene when something goes wrong. So if there's a leak, test a valve, or monitor something and send back some sort of an alert back to the base. So very briefly, 2 of the projects that we are involved in. One is in the area of nuclear. So there are lots and lots of nuclear plants, both here in India, in Europe, in the UK, in France, particularly, which have finished their life. So somebody has to deal with all the nuclear waste. So somebody has to decommission it. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The governments pay a huge amount of money to be able to do that in a safe fashion. So we're creating robotic technologies to be able to do that. And finally, space. And I know that Dr. Kalam was particularly interested in space and rocket technologies. And so one of the areas is we're working very closely with NASA on the Johnson Space Center on a mission to Mars, and there are various timelines. But the most relevant timeline for us is about unmanned missions, which will pre-deploy assets on the surface of Mars. So not manned missions, but unmanned missions. And we are trying to build capabilities of humanoid robots to be able to do things that astronauts would do. That people who do the text and walking through, opening doors, very basic things that we take for granted. And the real economic reason for that is unmanned missions are going to be about 4 or 5 times cheaper. We can also de-risk technologies. So, for example, light customing technology that we want to test. If we don't want to test it with astronauts, for instance, we want to test the things go right with the robots. So those are the new exciting things that's happening.
And just a couple of things come to my mind. One is suggestion. I think one of the things which India would greatly benefit, 2 sectors that I think robots would be fantastically applicable. One is in the field of sanitation. Recently we got a news, and this keeps happening. Well, the riskiest job in India is to clean the gutters. It's statistically proven. The riskiest job is to go down in the gutter, and because there's gas, there may be rapid flow of water, and there's always incidents. Last month we lost 4 lives in the gutters. One after the other. And I think there's a tremendous field of application in sanitation. The other field I thought was agriculture. Dr. Kalam stressed, even when he was there, that how can we make our farmers more productive using robotics? So I think those are 2 sectors you can also.
Absolutely. So I mean, I can point to you some very concrete projects that we are trialing in the UK. So in Leeds, the University of Leeds, the City of Leeds have taken up the initiative to try and exactly this sort of sewerage gutters, inspection and maintenance of sewerage. Of course, some of those cities are, I would say, much more homogenized compared to sewers and gutters here in India. So you could create one solution which works pretty much all over the city. You may need much more innovative solutions here, which are very possible. Absolutely. So I think that's a big challenge for young Indian scientists here to do that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a great area because it's not about taking jobs; it's about taking people out of harm's way. Absolutely, it's about taking jobs away from things that you definitely don't want to do, right? And so that's very important. And the second point you mentioned was in agriculture. So again, sometimes people come back to us and say, is robotics in agriculture relevant for a country like India because you've got lots of farmers, you've got relatively cheap labor. So why would you do robotics for this is relevant for Australia, this is relevant for the US because you've got large lands, the population to land ratio is very different from India, so it's not relevant. So actually I don't buy that argument because it's not just about the quantity of food, it's also about the quality of food. Here we are really struggling with the massive use of pesticides, indiscriminate use of pesticides, drugs being used to kill. So antibiotic resistance is a big problem in drugs. So exactly. So robotics can help massively there because one of the key aims of robotics in agriculture is not just about harvesting insects, it's about killing weeds, targeted killing of weeds by using minimum amount of insecticides, pesticides, targeting fertilizers in key areas by monitoring the health 24/7. Exactly, agriculture 24/7 for monitoring of these things. So these are the things that maybe but may not be possible for humans to do, but robots can work with solar-driven robotic cars to work 24/7.
And in fact, even in the disaster management, we see the state of Iraq seeing a cyclone coming in. And this is a very regular phenomenon because we are a monsoon-driven country where weather suddenly changes. So I think even in disaster management, this data-driven approach would be extremely useful.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think those are things to add to this.
Definitely. I mean, so we had looked at a very funny video recently about some BBC had gone and shot some videos in Australia about a farm where the cows were very, very polite cows. They would line up in a nice little line. They would enter an automatic sort of milking booth and station. There would be an automatic milking machine that would attach to the thing. And data-driven is very important because along with the quantity of data of milk produced and everything else, it's also monitoring the health of the cows, and so that we can customize its feed based on what the data is coming out. So really optimizing this both for the welfare of the animals, but also for optimizing production.
So first of all, we're here in India to as part of the program to enhance the pedagogy and the curriculum of Indian education system. Yeah. And you've been doing this for quite a while now. You were in Kanpur about 3 months back, and now you're in Delhi, and you'll be coming again in a couple of months or so. So you've been traveling across India while being in Edinburgh, even now. Sure. Where do you see India compared in terms of our focus, our effort in robotics, vis-a-vis the centers in Edinburgh or elsewhere? Where do you see Indian universities, especially technology universities, stand?
So maybe I'm going to take one step back and think about slightly more globally. I think there are some global challenges in terms of whenever people talk about robots and job losses. So really, my feeling is that it's not about job losses. It's about changing or shifting demographics of the skills that's needed. So that's the first thing I think people need to understand across the globe, that the kind of skills that were relevant in the previous century are not going to be relevant, or going to be less relevant in the next century. So it's the governments, the countries, the societies which get that training aspect right in the next 15 to 20 years who are going to be leaders of tomorrow. That's the first premise. So we have to make sure that happens in India, in the right places. Now, having said that, so somebody asked me, what is the right level to intervene? Is it the universities? Is it the IITs? Is it is it postdoctoral studies? Is it government? My real belief is that it is much early on. It is at the level of schools. It's at the level of getting kids grassroots level education. We're getting them interested in, fascinated about things like STEM subjects in coding, getting them really hooked into, just like getting hooked into your video games and other things. Really get them hooked into creating value based on such STEM subjects, technology, coding, science aspects, because that is going to be crucial for the next generation. So let me give you an example of a project that I'm driving at the moment in the UK. So if you go to Google and if you Google BBC Microbit, so it's a small little device. I thought I can bring it with me. I should want this nice little thing to show. It's a little bit like a Raspberry Pi. It's an IC little chip that is given free of charge to all primary 7 kids in the UK. So it's class 7 kids. It's given free of charge to class 7 kids in the UK, and there are some resources online. So what you can do with that is you just attach a little battery to it, and that little chip has got the ability to, it's got a very primitive display, and it's got some sensors which can detect the orientation of the chip in 3D, like a gyroscope, exactly. And it's got little motor drivers. You can connect little motors to it from outputs, and then you can, using some resources online, very basic resources online, and even I would say a 5-6 year old can have a look at it. You can use some block diagram based programming techniques to write some very simple routines to make fun things happen on the chip using some drivers. You can create a little helicopter or some device that reacts, some light, things like that. And the key is not bombarding students with some C code or Python or Java code, but rather giving them something which is toyish, which is, so this will be, so the interface is built in such a way that if you know the program Scratch from MIT, it's very similar to that. So you take blocks, move blocks around, and do some fun stuff, and you create a program with blocks. And then, if you're interested, you can open up the box and find out what is inside the box. So you, rather than starting with something which is really hard to get into, start with something which is fun, and give them something which grabs their attention and energy, and then slowly expose the underlying complexities. And I think that's something we need to do in India. It's for free. It's co-sponsored by industry. So, for example, the 100,000 or whatever, I forget the numbers, it's close to 200,000 or 250,000 of those chips manufactured. So a lot of it is sponsored by the companies. For example, the sensor will come from a particular company, so that is sponsored by the company free of charge. For them, it's peanuts. The IC boards will be sponsored by another company which manufactured it from their point of view. So my feeling is that if you really price it, that little chip should be no more than 10 to 15 pounds. That is 1,500 rupees, 2,000 rupees. But even getting that completely free is the right thing to do, because that will create. Otherwise, people always think, "Oh, should I invest that money? Or can I just go buy another toy?" Exactly. And the key thing is to educate the teachers to be able to contacts, give them the resources, that they don't have to go out of their way. Those are Michelle the other day, she was saying this, teachers are already overloaded with stuff, so you want to give them all the help that they can to be able to roll out these programs efficiently.
Absolutely. In fact, I was there in university in one of the programs in October. That was astrobiology. And we were given a mine, 2 kilometers, the Goldie mine in BP, trying to simulate Mars, how we land and what we go. All these aside, what was most surprising and also exciting was to find that out of the team of 30, about 4 to 5 were teachers. They were professors, they were primary school teachers from all across the world, and their job was to make it interesting. Take this experience, make it a syllabus which is exciting and interesting, as I said, for the children. So they said the next Mars walker is not going to be amongst us. So it is going to be among those in 5 years, 10 years, something like that.
Absolutely, and I mean, along those lines, I've been involved for the past 10 years now with one of the world's oldest, not one of the world's oldest international science festivals, called the International Science Festival. Again, go Google it, find out. So it's EISF, so Edinburgh International Science Festival. And their mission is really to take some of these ideas that you said, very simple concepts. Every year, a different theme. One is about connected world. Last year, it was connected world. Another one was about your body, how you understand your body in relation to technology and monitoring your health. Another one was about space as well. So every year there's a different theme. And in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 or 4 years back, they bought this festival to Bangalore. The Edinburgh International Science Festival was held in Bangalore as part of the franchising thing. And I think those are the kind of things that India should develop this indigenously, because those kind of things really captures the attention of the young kids.
Right. So the message in nutshell is start early, right?
Absolutely.
And run long. So if you start early, you run long.
Absolutely.
Great. Now what we do is that we take a break of 2 minutes again. When we do that, we will discuss on how does an individual who might be actually young and work in this field of robotics, what are the opportunities, how does one go about being in India, how can one go about being an international robotics scientist, and then we will also share what did you learn from robotics. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the 3rd session of our conversation called Shabdh with Professor Sethu Vijayakumar, who is not only a leading robotic expert in the world, but also a great friend of Dr. Kalam. He also wrote an excellent piece in one of Dr. Kalam's book in 2015. The book is here, Reignited. Now, in this 3rd session, Professor, I wanted to discuss on 2 aspects. Now, the first one is about robots and job loss, and the other is how does one, want a career in robotics? How does one go about? I've been associated with many universities across India, and many of the technology universities, especially at Indian media, has been discussing these days massively on how automation and robotics is going to lead to a job loss. In fact, there have been hashtags about this, how stop automation, and because each robot can take away 4 jobs, that's the usual statistical mind which we have. And many Indian IT jobs, for instance, are being, they're being lost, or the companies are not expanding in terms of employment. The revenues are going up, the workforce is not. Now, see, the general fear in India and many other nations, developing countries, emerging economies, is that robots and automation will make humans redundant. What is your take on that?
So I think that is a debate that not just India, but the rest of the world has been grappling with at various stages, whether it be the governments or the legislation. And I think what is going to happen is there will be inevitably some change in the demographics of the job scenes. So there will be some losses in certain sectors, and that is inevitable. And if you think about, I don't know, half a century ago, when the Industrial Revolution happened, when the steam engine came, there were lots of similar sort of scaremongering about, the steam is going to put a lot of people out of jobs, the farmers, the textile workers. So there is going to be a period of turmoil in terms of the transition. What is going to happen is the kind of jobs that we will do is evolve and change over time. So it's true that we are going to apply, from an idealistic point of view, from a very positive roboticist perspective, I feel that we will use robots definitely for doing the kind of jobs that humans should not do, does not like to do, and from a health and safety perspective would like to avoid doing. So there are many sectors we briefly touched upon earlier as well, the sort of sewage maintenance and other things. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is at the pace at which we are building up certain infrastructure, high-rise buildings, underground metros, bridges. It is going to become physically impossible for humans to actually go about inspecting, certifying, and figuring out the life of these things, even if we wanted to do it. So we are creating new capabilities or possibilities that does not exist now. So rather than taking away some jobs, we are creating new jobs, new capabilities that does not exist now using the new technology. And finally, in terms of looking at some sectors which involve sort of, say, for example, hard labor jobs, so autonomous driving cars makes it very topical in terms of, taxi drivers, etc. So indeed, there will be a shift in the demands of the next generation of jobs. So it's true that it's not going to happen overnight. The adoption of technology will happen in a sort of roughly, in a very haphazard way. There will be lots of hybrid situations, but it's going to happen. It's economically driven. So just by some government or somebody saying that no, we're not going to allow robotics technologies to develop because we want to protect our jobs, will not prevent the core fundamental advancement in these technologies around the world. It is driven by economics. So I think we should not make the mistake of saying that we don't want to take this development forward, because otherwise somebody else will. There will be countries which will be leading in 5, 10, 15 years time in that area, and eventually we will be buying technology from them. So I think it's important that we address this in a way that is socially responsible. So there are some very interesting measures that I don't know. I'm not a social scientist, so I don't know I don't have the right answers to these questions. But there are some interesting suggestions about things like looking at a basic income. So many countries are trialing something like that in more technologically advanced societies. There's things like thinking about autonomous systems or solutions as an entity. Why? Because then you can tax them. So every time a company or an entity introduces an autonomous robot or autonomous driving system,
Bill Gates listed.
It gets, yeah,
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates probably did, yeah. So then every time you do that, you have an ability to tax those systems. Why do we tax it? Because then that goes into a common pot that creates jobs, feeds towards the basic income. If there are liabilities, for example, something goes wrong, and if there are liabilities that are not traced back to individuals or companies, then this pot can be used to pay out for damages, things like that.
But I think such a pot is a very risky idea, because then you're creating a welfare state for humans and an economic asset for the robots. And so essentially, the humans are the welfare now. They depend on the welfare of the robots. Almost. That's
probably right. So as I said, I'm no expert in this. So I would leave it up to the experts to debate those aspects so I'm just mentioning the different things that people have suggested, and there have been some trials. I think in Finland there's been some recent trials with basic economic income. I think there's some parts of Canada that they've started trialing this. So who knows what is the right thing for an Indian economy?
So don't you think that there is now a space and an urgent need for, say, robotic scientists and engineers like yourself to also engage with policymakers of the world? Because what I see across the world, like in India or anywhere, democracies are not, they don't have that participation of scientists.
Yeah.
Do you think it's high time that democracies take active participation of scientists and make policies to address issues like this one?
I fully agree. I think it is imperative that we involve people who are technologically savvy in making these laws for two reasons. I think one is because currently all of these things happens in silos. So there's the policymakers, the lawyers who think about these technologies from an outside perspective and make these laws purely from an economic and governance perspective. On the other hand, there are technologists who look at technology and pursue certain things, certain technologies purely for the science aspects and for creating major breakthroughs without understanding the social implications, the social impacts of some of the technologies that they're building. And I think we need both these sort of set of people to talk much more fluidly, much more on a constant basis. So that is one of the challenges. And the other aspect comes from the fact that you know, when we make these policies have to be informed by both, not because all the time people say, you know, do you understand how powerful this robot is? I don't think that is the issue. It's about whether you understand the limitations of some of these systems. So the reason why I say that is sometimes people who don't fully understand the technology trust the system to do something that it is inherently not capable of doing. You think about, you know, computer vision systems that operate, for example, in autonomous driving cars or any other technology that, so it's got serious limitations. It can work in very nice environments, well-lit environments. The moment you get shadows, the moment you get changing weather conditions, when there's rain, there is snow, you get failures in the system. And that is acknowledged by the scientists. But by the time the Chinese whispers, by the time that technology gets sold on to some users by lots of intermediate people, investors, that technology goes from being, oh, that's a great technology, but it has got these failure modes and it will fail 5% of the time when you've got these things. And it becomes, by the time it reaches there, it becomes Chinese whispers. That's the next best thing to sliced bread. And it can solve your problem, including your marriage woes, right? So that is really the problem. It's not about understanding how powerful it is, about understanding the limitations. And that's why technologists and governance needs to happen in close conjunction with people who develop it.
And can you think of a country which is doing good in this?
Again, I am no expert in this area, but so there's already some initiatives in the UK that I'm aware of. For example, the Alan Turing Institute, which is headquartered in London, but has got its branches all over, including we've got a small satellite in Edinburgh. So we are looking at not just technology and sort of machine learning impact of AI, but there are some people who are focusing on the ethics and the morality and the lawmaking underlying this elements. In our center, we force our PhD students who work on technology to attend at least 2 to 3 workshops or programs, things that they can organize, or other programs that focus on the social impacts of the development of technology. So we had recently some very eminent speakers from, for example, Professor Wendell Wallach from Yale University, who focuses on exactly this kind of aspects. We've had Noel Sharkey, who's a co-judge with me on the BBC Robot Wars. So BBC Robot Wars is a massive, it's got a massive following in the UK and abroad. It's a little bit of a cult thing. Robots, 3 generations of families working in sort of Robot Wars domain. So Noel Sharkey is one of my co-judges, head judge on that thing. Actually works on with the UN very closely on, he focuses on something very narrow and specific. This is about banning autonomous weapons. So robots that are both used for recognition and targeting systems. I mean, it's a very interesting point, because on the one hand, you can argue that AI and machine learning driven targeting systems are actually better for humanity because it is less indiscriminate than things like cluster bombs for taking on terrorism. But on the other hand, it's the ethics, the morality of the thing that people are questioning. In other words, if you've got autonomous systems which recognize, have a value function of saying what is good and bad and fire autonomously, then the fact that there is no human person making that decision makes accountability very vague. And it's about trying to address those aspects of social morality and ethics for autonomous systems. You know, the weapons is one extreme. Of course, there are lots of grey other bits in between, including autonomous driving cars. What decisions should a driving car make when you have this option of hurting the person inside versus running over a pedestrian versus getting. So there are all these grey areas which we have not tackled sufficiently because the governance and lawmaking has not caught up with the pace at which AI and technologies and robotics has developed recently.
Right. And at some point, do you think, I mean, this is an often asked question, it's almost like a cinema question, but even I keep getting this question from all over children. Will there be a time when robots develop consciousness? Mm-hmm. Will there be a time when robots develop emotions? There was a kid I remember in Chhattisgarh and in a remote village, and he asked me that, will robots someday ask for their rights? Mm. We will only work 8 hours. Mm-hmm. But do you think this will ever happen? Do you think robots can potentially develop consciousness?
So I typically counter that question by sort of asking another question: how do you define consciousness? Because I think people can perceive a notion of intelligence and consciousness in systems by the way a robotic system behaves. So let me give you a very simple example. So you can actually create a little a cluster of robots, small robot clusters, small robots moving in a 2D plane. You can encode it with some very basic rules. I think many of you probably played something called the Game of Life in a video game, or it's the same principle. You can sort of cluster it program it with some basic rules like I repel away, I move away when I am near below a certain distance from other robots. I move away from the edge, and I have some other behaviors otherwise. So if you put 100 of those cluster robots in an arena with those very simple local basic rules, over time you will see a kind of pattern of behavior emerge. Almost like ants when they're transporting food from one part to the other. So somebody may look at that behavior if you don't understand what is the rule that has been programmed underneath it, and they might look at that behavior and say, oh, that looks like an intelligent cluster of robots having some social interactions and having a social norm and law, and this robot likes this robot and this guy hates the other one. I mean, you could interpret a behavior just coming out of very simple rules like that. So the fundamental question is, sometimes can you think of those robots as having some conscious behavior? It's not, because you programmed it with some local rules, but the complexity of the interactions can sometimes make it feel as if there is an emergence of consciousness, emergence of this thing. So there's a fine line between, of course, the famous Alan Turing test is the Turing test is the people have thought about it as something which is the ground truth in these kind of things. It's unclear what is the right way to test for consciousness. But one thing that can be said is that because we are working on learning systems or adaptive systems, so the input-output behavior, in other words, when a sensor comes in and some behavior that happens as a response to that sensor input, that is becoming more and more non-deterministic. It's becoming harder to predict the behaviors of robots if you have adaptive systems. So that could be interpreted as the robot having a mind of its own. So I think the real debate is not whether robots will gain consciousness or will have some. The real debate is, will the systems that we build become so complex due to this adaptive behaviors and due to this adaptive interconnections, that we ourselves will find it hard to track it back, to interpret the actions, and when something goes wrong, we will find it hard to find out the causality of that failure to try and correct it. Will it become so complex that we will not be able to track it back to the cause of the failure? We may have shut down the whole system down, and we may not be able to fix things. And that is the real question.
It almost makes me think that maybe even our own consciousness is nothing but adaptive robots.
Who knows?
So what I wanted to also stress is, on the other side, yes, there will be demographic shift in terms of the employment. But where do you think robots are generating jobs for humans? What are the sectors where somebody can expect, say somebody who's in engineering first year today, in 5 years, somebody who's in school today, in 10 years, what kind of sectors one should expect the new jobs to come because of the robotic revolution?
Okay, so I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict such things, but I can give you my views about these things. So let me start by just explaining what is the core skills that a roboticist need. So robotics is a very unique discipline because it requires expertise from across the board. So you need people who are good at mechanical engineering design, that's pretty obvious. You need people who are good at electronics and communications, because you need circuits that control it. These days, everything, there's less and less of mechanical linkages. There's more and more of electronic relays and linkages. So these days, maybe 50 years back, when you used to hit a brake on your car, there is a mechanical linkage which actually goes in and slams the brake in. These days, you've got typically electronic circuits that trigger a button that eventually kind of goes and then hits the thing. So you need significant expertise in electronics and design. You need very good software engineers who code well, who have skills in databases so that you can do things that are reliable. That's the most important thing. So reliable and verifiable software and hardware, and that is going to be the challenge. So we need those kind of skills. And surprisingly, you also need skills in other areas like design, because you need to find out what is ergonomically, what is the right design for designing a particular robot that a human will feel comfortable with. Whether be it your next latest mobile phone, or whether be it your autonomous driving car, or your helper robot in your room. So you need to design the right form factor, the right sort of I would say the designs is going to be very important for acceptance into the society. Which rival company will win over which one? You can see an example of Apple and others. I mean, we don't want to be biased in any way, but that plays a very important part. And then another thing which is not very obvious is the social engineers. So people who understand the relationship of humans and robots, how it evolves, and the acceptance of robots into society, and how that's going to change the way we work, play, and live. And I think that is very important in terms of getting the social engineering going. So you really require skills from across the board. And so in theory, if you are well informed, you understand the problem, then there is a role for many people across the board. You can play a role in the robotics industry, I would say. Now going back to the question of what is the
new jobs.
Yeah, sorry. Well,
my question was, what are the new jobs?
New jobs. Yeah, right. Of course, one thing that's obvious is that we will need people who are skilled in maintaining and debugging systems. So electronic systems, software engineering systems, things that are we are still very far away from self-correcting, self-managing, self-replicating devices. So I don't think that is going to happen in the near future. So you need a lot of human debugging power and things that analytical power in terms of trying to figure out when something goes wrong, what is the causal reasoning for that. We will obviously have some help by built-in systems, but we still need people who can sort of manage these things. So I also think we will use robotics in a way where we augment ourselves, our bodies. You can almost think of it like the Avatar movie as an example. So we may be sitting in our living rooms and operating devices. It doesn't have to be varying things. It could be just a camera or a Kinect looking at your body and you moving it. And you may be operating, doing a lot of jobs. You may be doing a mining job in a mine which is like the Bulby mine, which is in the next state, sitting in your living room,
or maybe the next planet.
In the next planet, absolutely. So we may be, for your commute to work, maybe moving from your bedroom to your living room or your next room, and operating a device which is teleoperated over a network. So it could be that you are. And of course, I think with the human population aging, we living longer and longer, there's going to be increasing demands for managing our health, creating solutions for problems that arise out of natural, wear and tear of our body parts. So we will see more and more jobs created in that area, which is co-assisted by robotic systems. So robotic systems that help medical professionals, nurses, carers to give a much higher, I would say, quality of life for the aged when towards the end of their life. So we will see that. We will see parts in your body that are replaced as they fail, using a combination of sort of 3D printed parts, tissue engineering. You'll have jobs in those sectors potentially. We will have potentially jobs in two very large extremes of robot sizes. You may have robot engineers controlling nanobots for delivery of drugs, targeted delivery of drugs in your body. And you may, on the other hand, have big robot structures building whole buildings, and you may need humans who know how to operate it and plan things, again, figure out how things work. So in a range of industry, and again, I'm not in the business of speculating, but that's what I think.
Right, absolutely. And you think this will lead to cyborgs, people who are
well, we already see that if you've not been healthy in your eating style, you typically have various bits and pieces inside your body already. You have a stent. You have a stent in your heart. I'm kind of a cyborg because 4 years ago I actually tore my ACL playing football. I completely tore my anterior cruciate ligament. So I actually have now they did a little keyhole surgery using robotics, using devices. They took a hamstring, a tendon from my hamstring, and they put a pin across my knee. And I now still manage to play, squash and badminton. I don't do football anymore, but I have a couple of pins in there, which is restoring my. Otherwise, I would have been massively unhappy not being able to do any sport. So I think we're already seeing that. It's about we see Paralympics, people running really fast. Maybe if you compare the 100-meter pace of a Paralympian these days, it's probably I don't know the numbers, but it's probably as fast or maybe even faster than some able-bodied runners 25 years ago. So who knows? Yeah.
And a Blade Runner, for instance.
Yeah.
So one last question I want to ask you in this segment is, see, there are a lot of, say, engineering students. So there are students in other streams, medical, for instance, who are studying in India and are interested to do something on robotics, to know more, to be a learner of robotics, while they are part of whatever they're doing. Do you think that, or do you know, can you maybe guide us with what kind of learning tools are available, say online or short-term courses, which they can, or resources which they should follow to be, whatever they're doing, they become aware and expert in some sense, not really experts, but at least aware of what's happening in the field of robotics. So what would be the resources they should chase?
Okay, so I think I want to start by saying that it is probably a wise thing not to get into, not to sort of, I would say, narrow yourself into robotics at the level of an undergraduate degree. I think robotics, a lot of these skill sets that's required in robotics comes from a general analytical, developing your skills in becoming more analytically able. So what that means is that if you are have got some core good fundamentals in any of the areas like mathematics, physics, mechanical engineering, computer science, I would recommend both school students and undergraduate university students to focus on core skills at the beginning, because often I've seen some of the top students that work with me in my group are people who haven't done any robotics early on in their life, but they've been excellent, they're world-class, either mathematicians or physicists who have an analytical thinking, computer scientists who can code really well and sort of think about logic design, mechanical engineers who understand the basics of kinematics and dynamics. So they have not been thinking about building a robot so early in their life, but they've honed their core skills so that you can then, if you get thrown a problem at you, then you can break that problem down into what are the constituents of that problem and then sort of work from it. So my real advice would be to not get sucked into the hype of AI and robotics and trying to build your robots too early, but really, of course, you should do that as a hobby, as an interest, but that should not be at the expense of building your core skills in maths, in analytical thinking. Sometimes I end up seeing some guys who've gone too quickly into that area of saying, but they don't know what a differential equation is, they don't know how to solve a matrix algebra, and I think there's no hiding from the fact that you need to know those fundamentals anywhere in life. Even now, I at that age do use some of those core skills in talking to my students, working through some papers. So that is very, very important, and without that, there's no easy way to jump that core base and sort of go into something which is something else.
So develop fundamentals. That's absolutely. Right. So now we'll come to a close in this section. In the next section, we'll discuss a bit about Dr. Kalam, because he visited your lab, you had an interaction with him, and we want to discuss. And he also was a technologist who was into policy making, which is a scientist into policy is something which we are saying is rare. And and then we have some members from the audience who will take a few questions. So we'll see you soon. In 2 minutes, we'll be back. Our episode with Professor Sethu Vijayakumar, who is from University of Edinburgh, who is a world-renowned roboticist. He's somebody who started his life in Canada, went to Japan, and then finally he's now in Edinburgh. Now, what I wanted to discuss in this final segment, Professor, with you, were two things. One is, of course, we'll take audience questions. But before that, Dr. Kalam visited your facility in the university. He received an honorary doctorate from the University of Edinburgh in the year 2014, May. And he visited your center. He spent more time than what was initially anticipated. And he loved everything, and he reflected it in many speeches, and even this book, Reignited, he wrote about it. I wanted to know from you, while Dr. Kalam learned a lot in your center, and he actively experimented. He became the specimen where you could put the hand, the movement replicating robot. I was wondering, what were your experiences? What did you learn, and what was your opinion, and how it changed about Dr. Kalam's philosophy in that visit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always it was a childhood dream for me to meet him, because he's always, as with all Indians, he's been an inspiration. He's an example of a person who started with a very modest background and achieved great heights through his dedication and hard work. And I think he's a very strong example of a person with a very focused, single-minded vision, and somebody who works tirelessly to achieve that. And this is reflected throughout his career, all the way from leading India's space program to the missile program to during his presidency. So I think I obviously had read his books, and I was really excited to know that he would be visiting. My reflections on his visit are that he was amazingly soft-spoken. So he was. You would expect somebody who's had that kind of career and that kind of recognition to really be, I would say, it's hard to put those in words, but less simple, I would say. But he was an amazingly simple person, and he was very genuinely interested in some of the things we were talking about. I've dealt with many celebrities and politicians, and many of them would come there just because they wanted a photo op, or they want to. Many of them are not genuinely interested in your work. On the other hand, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding the nitty-gritty of some of the elements of the work. He asked, as I said, some very poignant questions. He tried to relate some of the work to things that he had done with for example, the Jaipur foot and I still remember his questions about using the sort of titanium, the technology from the Agni missile to then use it in a lightweight prosthetic for the polio patients, for example. So that was very inspirational for me, because that is a way of thinking about how you can think about a core problem, solve it, at the same time think about offshoot technologies that come out of it for use in other areas, for other domains. So it's very interesting, because in fact, as some time after that, at that point I was working on variable impedance technologies that have the ability to modulate stiffness and damping for safe robot operations, and you saw that in the blue arm that we operated. So after that visit, I really tried to think about ways in which some of those technologies can be applied to other domains. And funnily enough, after that we did a project which took the same variable impedance technologies, so modulating the stiffness, and applied it to the area of renewable wave tidal energy. So looking at how you can adjust the stiffness properties of what we call the snake waves, wave snakes. So these are the things that, these are generators, it's called FPOs, so wave takeoff power devices. And we try to apply it in a different domain. So that, in that sense, it was quite inspirational to talk to him, and his vision about trying to take core technologies and look at other domains where it can be applied. The other thing that I still have a very vivid memory of is always at the end of a little segment he would ask, so what is your mission? I'm sure you remember that as well, right? So he would ask, so what is your mission? So initially I was a bit taken aback. So I said, no, I don't have any mission. So because so he would always ask the question, so what is the mission? So, and I think what he meant by that, and I kind of towards the end I got it, was that what is your long-term view of taking? So you're solving a small problem, and you're focusing on that right now. But do you have a bigger vision about taking this to either apply to other domains or thinking about it from a bigger perspective? It could be at the level of the center, it could be at the level of a project, but I think it's a good idea to step back after you've done a lot of work and got some results, to step back and think about, why did I start this, and what is the reason? So those are two things that really come to my mind.
Absolutely. It's thinking big. They always said that small aim is a crime.
Yes.
And no matter who you are, even if you're a kid or you are some professor, he said small aim is a crime. You should, whatever you do, have a large email. Right?
Indeed.
So it's great that in an hour and a half or so, 2 hours, he spent almost there. There was so much to learn, and that was fantastic. He actually talked about the visit in multiple places. He talked about you personally, and he talked about your story, the whole education journey. And I remember you showed him a portrait, a painting kind of a thing, where as soon as we entered the office, it was like a complex diagram of some sort. And that's how he got immediately interested in that, because he started asking questions on that.
So those were the Turing prints, actually. Yes. So this was we've got a room called the Turing room. That's where we host our dignitaries as a first point of meeting, and it's the Turing prints. And so those were prints, that was. It was a Palozzi print. It was an artist called Eduardo Palozzi who was both a sculptor and a painter, and he had some particular affinity to Edinburgh, and so he painted some of these things. So we have some of the sculptures in Palozzi sculptures in Edinburgh's informatics building. But those Turing prints, what you mentioned about, is a very interesting one, because it actually starts by looking at, so it looked at geometric figures and how organization happens, and then it was about the story of the World War II, actually, about how initially there was chaos in the system and sort of, all sorts of problems, and then through equations, through the sort of arrangement of geometric figures, it finally, from a Allies point of view, obviously the Allies point of view, it basically all fell in place, and there was finally a print about the D-Day and the victory and everything else. So this is an example of how art and science and everything kind of comes together in a very interesting way. And in fact, we have a very interesting program in Edinburgh. About, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, the Edinburgh's Art School, Edinburgh Centre for College of Art, merged with the University of Edinburgh, and now we have a new program called Design Informatics. So Design Informatics, which looks at things like design, things like social challenges, including design, where we are using the power of data to influence some of both the designs and some solutions. So yeah, interesting.
It's all coming together.
It's all coming together.
Great, fantastic. Now with us here, we also have got 4 young people who are Dr. Kalam admirers. And what I want now is for them to ask certain questions which they have for Professor Vijayakumar. And also, if someone out there on social media, if you want to ask a question, you have got approximately 10 minutes to type your question as a comment there. And if your question is good, we will definitely take it up with Professor Sethu Vijayakumar. And you can ask anything. You can ask about his journey. You can ask about Edinburgh. To me, it's the most beautiful city in the world. You can ask about that, and of course, you can definitely ask about robotics. So let me begin with the first participant out here. Requesting you to get your name, where are you from, and then you can direct the question to Professor.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashwini and I am studying medicine at Army College of Medical Sciences. So I have a very basic question to ask. to you. In a country like India, which is still in its developmental state, what do you think is the future of robotics?
So that's a very broad question, and I would say that it is something that we have to go through a journey to fully answer, because there are various applications across the domain. But since you're a medical student, and I think I may try and answer that question with a slight medical angle, so that is probably more relevant to you. India faces lots of medical challenges, things with, for example, things like pollution, and which is affecting the everyday health of people, all the way to things like stroke for patients who've, the many stroke patients, things like problems with the cholesterol and heart problems, as well as things in the prosthetics domain, in other words, amputations. So in some sense, robotics can play a very important role in making the efficiency of the health delivery, the delivery of the health solutions much more efficient.
Hello everyone, I'm Shabdh. I am pursuing medicine from Delhi. So, I read this book called Chariots of God by Eric von Däniken, and he said something about the early men, the first men, having contact with aliens. Well, those can be biological entities, or they might be robots too. So, what is your take on history reflecting on robotics? And that's it.
Yeah, so funnily enough, Chariots of God is a book that I read when I was a kid as well. I had on that book, there's an illustration of the Nazca lines in Peru. So I was fascinated with that, and that was one of my bucket lists to-do list when I found that when I was really young. This is I would say just in 11th to 12th in my schooling time. Surprisingly, and I think maybe this is something that's back of mind all the time. So when I was in LA, I decided to make a trip to Peru to literally do that. So fly over the Nazca lines. So not just the Nazca lines. There's there's a candelabra that gets was also formed. It's a big shaped candle holder. So me and my wife, we actually took a trip to Peru, did a hike up Machu Picchu, and had a look at the Nazca lines. So it was fascinating. So coming back to the question of robots and alternate life for other planets, and potentially the robots collaborating with other robots. So I have really I'm not an expert in speculating the possibility of life, or robotic life, or biological life on other planets. I think NASA are doing a great job in exploring that with the SETI program to do that. But really, I think the question of whether you could have purely non-biological civilization is a very fascinating one for me. In other words, can we have
transformers?
Yeah, well, not transformers, but it's more. Can we sustain? Is there a way of sustaining a civilization which is non-biological, purely robots creating a society and working with each other? And that nicely reflects on some of the work that we are doing on something called cobots, or co-working robots. And so this is about robots, primarily about robots and humans working together in factory floors, in warehousing situations. So Amazon uses a lot of robots to move their goods around. But it's more about creating capabilities where we have a seamless collaboration between robots and humans, robots and other robots, and humans. So we want to create a fluid space. We want to create the technology that allows a fluid space which we can seamlessly. So for example, if I'm trying to lift a heavy load, and typically if you've got co-workers, you would kind of hand it over to this person, you would share the load and put things together. That happens quite seamlessly. So the question is, can we create a scenario where robots and robots collaborate to do something that an individual robot cannot do? For example, lifting heavy weights and manipulating things. Can robots and humans work together so that you have to do, there are some scientific challenges like human intention detection. When you start getting up and walking towards me, we as a social being have certain intuition and certain social norms to guess what is your intention in doing that, and we would respond appropriately. Shake your hand, or hand you some stuff. So similar things, can we equip robotic systems to do intention prediction, use machine learning to be able to learn from experience and act seamlessly so that the robot-human interaction happens naturally. So that is fascinating from my perspective, and I think could lead, if we get it all right, it could lead to a robotic civilization which can coexist and develop and evolve. Who knows?
Okay. Third question, can you take?
Hi, my name is Arun Mishra. I'm studying in 12th grade. So my question is that what type of technology that you guys are using to search for a new life or extraterrestrial life, or getting people to Mars? some other planet.
Okay. So I must add that Aryan has a claim to fame that he's a TEDx speaker himself, and
he discovered
an asteroid. So well done on that. So I'm equally honored to meet you in terms of young minds, curious minds, very important. So going back to the question on the search for planetary life or settlement on an alternate planet. So maybe I can tell you a little bit more about the NASA project that we have. We haven't talked about that. So Rob Ambrose, one of the heads of the robotics division in NASA, recently said, NASA's mission is to potentially make ourselves a two-planetary species for various reasons, for reasons of economics, for reasons of problems or issues that we may face in Earth in the future, for climate change, for issues that we may face due to the health of the aging population that may benefit from living on an alternate planet. Who knows? So we are exploring. We're making sure we have options open in some sense. So those of you who have watched the movie Martian, that movie is very well shot, I must say. Matt Damon does a good job, but not just that. I love him as an actor, but not just that. It's fairly accurate reflection of the challenges that you would face on the surface of Mars in terms of growing food, in terms of finding, creating oxygen that's breathable, dealing with radiation, dealing with communication delays with the base planet,
storms,
Martian storms. Challenges with the topsoil, dealing with extremes of temperatures. So all of these things are relevant challenges, and so one of the projects that we're doing with the Johnson Space Center is about creating unmanned robotics pre-deployment missions to Mars, so that we can de-risk technology. We can send missions that are maybe 4 to 5 times cheaper than a manned mission, because you don't have to build in as much redundancy into the system as for a manned mission. And also being able to do this in an efficient fashion, so that you can really pre-deploy assets on the surface before an astronaut arrives, so that you can really maximize the time spent on the surface initially to really explore things that only humans can do. You're not doing all the sort of preparatory stuff and assembly and all that kind of stuff. So again, Rob Ambrose, he recently said in one of his talks that if Columbus were to redo his mission to discover America, he might have done it in a slightly different way. He might have sent instead of carrying all his stuff in 3 ships and then landing on trying to find America, he might have pre-deployed containers to find in the search for America. The only problem was, at that point, he would have had the problem of answering the question of, 1, where is America, and 2, what is a container wagon? So in a way, he kind of motivates this notion of using humanoids to pre-deploy assets, so that we can really, first of all, do a kind of feasibility study without putting humans at risk for this kind of settlement. So we are developing technologies we're developing robots of different form factors. So somebody asked me, oh, you have this Valkyrie humanoid robot, 6 feet, 125 kilograms tall, electrically actuated, lots of sensors. Are you going to get the robot to walk on the surface of Mars, which is very rubbly, very, So actually, we are not. We're not going to get that robot is not for walking on the surface of Mars. It is for operating inside a habitat built for humans on Mars. There are other robots. There are wheeled robots. There are quadruped robots. There are other structures that we're building for navigation and exploration on the surface of Mars. So some of the technologies there are already mature, as if you're aware, the JPL in Caltech, for example, works a lot on the Mars rover technologies and quadruped navigation technologies. But we are focusing very much on dexterous manipulation on humanoids for co-assisting astronauts on ISS, on the space mission. And for that, the key element is we have to build in significant autonomy into this platform, because as you know, a signal from Earth to go to Mars and come back takes 15 minutes or so one way in some sense. And so teleoperating a robot is not an option. You have to build in significant autonomy. You can still give high-level missions, say that grasp this thing, open a door. Those kind of things are okay, but you cannot joystick a robot because of this delay. And that is why we are developing technologies that increase autonomy on these systems significantly.
Great. And Valkyrie happens to be your favorite robot. I remember that in the book.
It does. It's given me a lot of sleepless nights. I cry a lot sometimes. My students cry a lot. They miss their birthdays, but still it is my favorite robot.
The last question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm
Do you want to turn it around?
No,
Of course. You want to see the person who is answering the question, of course.
Okay. So my name is Gunjan and I'm a visual artist. And my question is that what do you think about the role of art in robotics and the role of robotics in art? Because these days you must be seeing that most of the artists in the contemporary art world, they're taking help and experimenting with the robots, machines and computers. So and is there any kind of experimental space where artists and scientists can work together, or exploring that side to create new visuals, basically?
Great question. So I think I must admit, to start off, a disclaimer that I am probably the worst artist in the world. I am not very skilled. I used to paint a little bit, but otherwise I'm kind of a bit tone deaf, and so my family compensates for that. I've got two little girls. One's a brilliant violin player, and she does Bharatanatyam dance. She's been learning since she was 3 years old. She performs the Edinburgh Fringe, so she's now 12 and 13. Turn 13, sorry. I'll listen to this. That'll be terrible, yeah. And I've got a 9-year-old who's a brilliant clarinet player, so she's learning to play, and my wife plays the arena as well. So I think our art is a great it's something that is essential in our life. I do enjoy music and art. So going back to the question of robotics and art, as I mentioned briefly early on, we have started a new initiative called Design Informatics, which brings together people who care about aesthetics, design, architecture, music, the digital aspects of those things, and looks at some interesting algorithms, solutions from machine learning that can enhance the artistic presentation. So, as you know, algorithms are one extreme of creativity. They're very sort of precise, accurate. Art and creativity is the other end of the spectrum. But we're finding common grounds where these two things can work together to create interesting installations and pieces. I forget we actually have. I'm not sure if it's still online. We used to have in Edinburgh a very interesting piece of musical instrument which was connected to the internet. You could tweet to it. You could. It was a combination of organ and sort of drums and some players, and it was developed by a professor in the School of Philosophy who worked closely with us, and that piece of musical instrument was connected to the internet. You could tweet to it, you could talk to it, it would have its own emotions, and it would tweet back. And so it recently won, maybe 3 years ago, it won the BAFTA. So I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So that's an example of connected networks and robotics working together with music. There's another interesting example. So in Zurich, I think it's at ETH, but I may be wrong, but they have they've been using robots and robotic devices to create art installations. So these are these are structures which are very complicated. So typically when you build a house, you have straight walls and right angle corners, because it's easy to do it. It's easy to maintain straight lines and to measure things, make sure it's accurate. But once you get robotic devices that actually compute and lay things precisely like a bricklaying robot or something like that, there's nothing preventing you from building buildings that look like a wave, that look very smooth, that look very circular, because you are taking away the restriction of having to use a plumb line to actually get it right. So there are examples of now installations of building stuff which follow very complex things that you design in some sort of your favorite Illustrator 3D designing thing with very complex curves, very complex hand drawn structures, and then you get a robot to build it, either 3D print it or use bricks and lay things out. So those are areas where already I think art and robotics is already playing a big part. And these days, as I mentioned also briefly earlier, aesthetics and design are very important parts of robotics, because you need those kind of the right skills to build the right form factor for aesthetics and ergonomics. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have anything more to add in this area, but you are the expert. Yes.
Thank you.
Great. No, I think that's fantastic narration. I think you're good at art. I should say interested. So I think as we come to a close to this 4-segment session, the last segment it was, I would like to thank you on behalf of our entire Kalam Centre, also on behalf of all the audience who were present here and who were present online. I'm sure they had a very knowledgeable session. They learned something from you. And I think personally, I must say that we are so proud of you that as an Indian, I see you in BBC, I see you in many other places. And it's fantastic to have an Indian person who shares Indian roots, Indian education, and has produced such a fantastic man of the future, as Dr. Kalam would say, man of the future. So I'm sure with the mission, what is your mission? We all know that. And you will continue, moving on your mission. And congratulations once again for the expansion of the center. I'd love to see it again. And I'm sure, if there's something where even online our children out here could witness the work which you do out there, we would love to have that interface built, because a lot of children would get so inspired by seeing what you are and your own story. So once again, thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, and I must add that I've been impressed with what you guys have been doing, setting up, continuing this vision of Dr. Kalam, and I wish you guys lots and lots of success and onwards and upwards.
Thank you. We'll stay in touch and we'll keep with this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.